Hello bookworms, I'm Becca. Welcome back to another video. For the past month or so, I have been rereading one of my favorite books of all time, and today I am very excited to be able to talk about A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This book follows a woman named Diana Bishop, who is actually a descendant of the Bishops from the Salem witch trials. Though she comes from a very powerful line of witches, Diana does everything in her power to not use her powers. Through her studies as a historian at Oxford, she ends up uncovering a long-forgotten alchemical manuscript that she finds is bound by a very powerful spell. Not wanting to mess with any of that magic, she ends up sending it back to the stacks. Little did she know, even recalling the manuscript in the first place unsettled something ancient. And now Diana will have powerful demons, witches, and more congregating together to get their hands on the book and her powers. Diana ends up joining forces with an unlikely ally, a vampire named Matthew Claremont, and as the two grow closer, and the tensions within the supernatural community surge, Diana finds it more and more difficult to hide the powers that she has had her entire life. As I mentioned, this was a reread for me, but as I got further and further into the book, I started to question if I had actually finished the book in the first place. It became abundantly clear that I only remembered the first half of the book. But we'll talk more about that later. Regardless of that, it was so wonderful to revisit this story. The pieces that I remembered were exactly how I remembered them, and the overall atmosphere of the book was something that really drew me into the story the first time, and I was happy to dive back into that world. The world that Deborah Harkness has created is absolutely impeccable. I absolutely loved the different ways that the creatures are categorized, with witches being historians, demons being correlated with the arts, and vampires being aligned with biology and medicine. It all just makes sense, you know? Throughout the course of the story, there's a lot of talk of alchemy, history, and genetics, which typically would be pretty intimidating for me because I don't typically read books that deal with those topics. However, I feel like Deborah Harkness did it in a way that is very accessible, and it made me feel super smart being able to keep up with what was happening in the story, which was nice. Overall, the story was very easy to follow, and I found myself incredibly invested in all of the different characters. Although I do think I enjoyed the book a lot more the second time around, I got a lot more out of it, I did still have a few issues with it. First of all, the pacing. Like I said before, I only really remembered the first half of the book, and as I moved on into the second half, I can definitely see why I didn't remember much of it. The first half of the book is pretty well paced. There's a lot of story set up and getting to know the different characters, but I do think that the climax of the story happened far too early, and then there wasn't really much going on in the second half except a lot of preparation for the next book to come. And I honestly don't think that that was entirely necessary. However, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the occurrences that I deemed as very mundane ended up coming back in the future books to hold some sort of significance, because Deborah Harkness seemed to do that with a few different things even throughout this first book, so I really wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it is set up for the next couple of books. But I do think that the pacing of the second half is a big reason why it took me so long to finish the book in the first place. Like I said, apart from one other scene and a few pieces of information clicking together from the first half of the book, the second half is more about setting up the second book and the relationships between all of the characters together, whereas the first half of the book is very much focused on Diana. She's by herself, she's at Oxford, she's meeting Matthew, and that is starting to grow, and then the second half you get to see Diana interact with other people in Matthew's life, and then ultimately Matthew and Diana going back to Diana's home to interact with her side of the family. And all of that was very interesting, don't get me wrong. I just found it very, very slow. Especially considering knowing the premise for the second book, I'm just not quite sure how all of the relationship building for the first story is going to carry over to the second book, but I guess I'll find out. My only other issue is the relationship between Diana and Matthew, and quite honestly, the relationship between Diana and a lot of the other characters in the book. I feel like a lot of the time Diana was treated very childish. She was talked over in just about every group conversation and oftentimes spoken for by her aunts and even by Matthew. And I just feel like she was talked down to quite a lot and had decisions made for her, which was really confusing to me because the first half of the book really sets up Diana as this independent woman. She's a renowned historian. She's giving talks at conferences. Over the course of the book, that starts to unravel bit by bit, and I just found it so frustrating because it did not seem like Diana was getting the character growth that I was hoping she would get. There were also several times over the course of the book where Diana wasn't given any information on a situation that pertained to her, and if she was given information, she wasn't given all of it. I just did not think that that was very fair to her. It almost felt like none of the other characters trusted her to be able to make decisions for herself and to have all of the information that she should have been having. I struggled with that a lot because there are a lot of very progressive themes within the story. Sarah and Em, who are Diana's aunts, are lesbians, and there's a big theme of being able to love who you love and have body autonomy, but then this isn't given to Diana at all. And a lot of the times that she was able to actually speak within conversations was only when she was forcefully asserting herself. And I just did not care for that. It was a weird juxtaposition that really irked me more and more as the book went on. And by the end, I found myself really not caring for Matthew, which is a big bummer because the second book is kind of all Matthew and Diana. So already I'm not doing so well with the second book. As Diana and Matthew's relationship itself started to grow, I feel like Matthew got very possessive, and that really rubbed me the wrong way. I did not like when Matthew was being possessive of Diana. And there were a lot of times where Diana would remark that she was not often left unsupervised, and I feel like we are supposed to accept this as being almost pack loyalty, where she was always around another vampire or a witch or someone close to her always knew where she was. And they were trying to do it subtly, but of course she's a grown adult. So she definitely picked up on the fact that people were not leaving her alone. And that goes back to me feeling like she just did not have the trust of the other characters in the book, which I guess kind of made sense because as you start to find out, because Diana pushed away her powers for so long, she doesn't have very good control over them. And so I think that the other characters were trying to come off as protective, but under the surface, they're a little bit afraid of what Diana can do. And I don't know, there was something about it that I just didn't like. Maybe that's just something very nitpicky, but I do remember the very first time that I read it, one of the things I liked is that it reminded me of a more grown-up Twilight, almost. And let me just say, there are definite similarities between the relationship of Diana and Matthew and Edward and Bella. I'm just saying. Even with those gripes, I still found myself thoroughly enjoying the book. One of the tropes that I tend to lean towards a lot is when books or TV shows or movies have historical events and kind of insert the characters, the fictional characters, into these very real historical events. And I feel like Deborah Harkness did this very well, especially with Matthew, who's a vampire, so he's centuries old. He was inserted into the Crusades and just other events in history, and you would uncover different instances where he was with famous people from the past. For instance, in his library, he has Shakespearean plays that are hand-signed, Your Friend Will. So he knew William Shakespeare as a friend, and he knows like all of these scholars and different famous individuals from throughout history, and I thought that that was so cool. And it definitely helped that Diana herself as a character is a historian, so she was just as taken aback while making these discoveries as I was reading it, which I thought it was very cool. I love when media does things like that. I don't know why. I just think that it's super cute, and it does help make the story a lot more believable, especially in something like this where it's kind of real world adjacent. I think that it's more of an urban fantasy. I think that that's the categorization, where it's these fantastical elements that are taking place in the real world, but the humans don't know about it. So it's this idea that there are witches and demons and vampires, and they could be doing everyday tasks. Your doctor could be a vampire, or your professor could be a witch, but none of the humans know that they exist. There would be times when two or more creatures would be together, and they would have to start trying to break up into groups, because if too many creatures were together, then the humans start getting suspicious of the people that are interacting, and I just loved that. It's one of my favorite things to read, and like I said, Deborah Harkness does it really well, and from the sounds of it, that's how a lot of the rest of the series is going to be. So if you like something similar, then you'll probably end up really enjoying this series. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. Overall, I was really glad to be able to finally give this one a reread and revisit one of my favorite worlds. Plus, it was even more fun sharing it with my friends in Discord. We read A Discovery of Witches as part of a Discord book club, and we're getting ready to pick what book we're going to be reading throughout October. So if you are interested in something like that, the link to join my Discord to keep that book club fun going is in the description below, and we would love to see you there. If you have read A Discovery of Witches, make sure to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. That's all I got for you today, and I will see you next time. Bye!